Welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast, the Bootcast, where 3 Canadians and 1 American serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Ryan.
I'm Chris.
I am Brooke.
And I'm Joanna.
Welcome, everybody. We're here for another night.
Woo.
We made it back, and we're trying to improve. We're always trying to improve the podcast. We've got a different little recording situation going on here. We're hoping that people can hear us more clearly because we don't want people to lose all this wisdom we're dropping because of technical difficulties, right?
It's true. Last week it sounded like Brooke and I were in a tin can.
2 little sardines.
True. Hopefully this week is a little bit better.
A little bit. You're a little bit canny still, Brooke, but we'll see.
You know what? Maybe it's me.
This is what Brooke
What
sounds
if
like.
I always have like
An echo?
an echo around me?
Always uncanny, eh? Always uncanny.
So anything new, guys, before we dive into our topic? Anything hot and interesting in your world? Not much going on.
You know
Canada?
what? This past week really flew by, I feel. So it's a little bit of a blur, but a lot of good moments, though, in terms of working with clients, and got out for some walks and stayed on top of all my reports and whatnot. So a very satisfying week, and also got into a new Netflix show. I was only going to watch 1 episode last night, and I ended up watching 4.
Which one?
What was it? Yeah.
It's a British crime show called Broadchurch.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very good. It hooked me.
Yes. I got sucked into a show called The Money Heist a few weeks ago.
I've heard about that one, Ryan.
Money Heist.
Yeah.
It was filmed in Spain, and you could either watch it with subtitles or they've overdubbed it. So I watched the overdubbed version, and holy cow, holy adrenaline, everybody! That show is a pulse pounding every minute sort of a show. It's wild. Yes. Watch it if you like intensity. It reminded me of the show 24. I don't know if you guys ever watched that back in the day, but it's like always a cliffhanger. You just can't stop watching. Ugh. Awesome.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I'm watching The World's Toughest Prisons. Is that what it's called? On Netflix? It's okay. It's obviously there's like a system to the show. Like it's the same thing on repeat. Like this is what it's like for intake. Here I'm in medium security. This is what it's like to work in the kitchen. Now I'm going to see solitary confinement, and now I'm going to see what minimum security is, and I'm going to talk to whoever's running the prison. So it's the same thing, but Chris and I belong to the Rotary, and there's a Rotary club up here who does some work with the prison in Belize, and word on the street was the Belize prison was featured in this, so I wanted to check that out.
Belize. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just prisons not just local. It's around the world, huh?
Oh yeah, it's all over
Great.
the place. So it's interesting to see how different people do different things, and the conditions. The conditions are horrifying, really. What they're very inhumane, and I don't know how they even get away with it. Yeah, interesting.
It is. Joe, are you watching anything? Might as well complete the circle here.
Nothing on the go. I still have to finish Parks and Recreation. I don't know if anyone's watched that, but I just I find comfort in going back to movies I've seen. I think after a long day of work, I like to know what I'm going to watch. I don't have the brain power to pay attention to a show or a movie, or what if I'm disappointed. So I like to kind of go to the ones I've watched probably 10, 15 times. It's comfort for me. So it's relaxing.
I've heard that mentioned before, that like the coronavirus like nostalgia viewing is very big these days. Like The Office and Friends and a lot of shows that people kind of grew up with or came of age with or whatever, they're watching those shows because it kind of brings them back to a more peaceful time or more nostalgic time.
Yeah, it works. And I could do stuff at the same time if I happen to look at my phone or be cooking dinner or something. So it's just kind of yeah, but Money Heist, I think that's on my list. I've been recommended that before, so.
Watch it. Don't expect it to be a relaxing, chilled out eve, because it is a oh boy, adrenaline rush. Great show. And also for me, I'm happy to say that my dog is only getting up 1.5 times a night. So I'm getting a little bit, so that's nice.
That's good. Are there any racquetball games named after your dog yet? Any Lexi ball or anything like that?
No, we have not taken over pickleball or anything like that. We're just enjoying a puppy and trying to keep up with her. Really, she's a handful. A lot of fun though.
Oh, that's great.
Lots of fun. So, okay, we're ready here, as is customary with the Mental Health Bootcamp podcast. We wait for one of us to drop an ambush question. The rest of us have not. We don't know what's there. We don't know what we're gonna find. So tonight is Chris. He is up. So do you have any intro for this, Chris, or what do you want to say?
I think it's going to speak for itself. It's a little straightforward, but I'm very curious to get everyone's perspective on this.
Okay. All right. You just sent me a text message with the topic of the night. Here we go.
I'm going to sit up straight. All right, I'm ready.
Get ready. It's like an episode of the Money Heist. You never know what's going to happen next.
Mm.
Okay. Let's talk about grief. Does everyone experience grief after a loss? Are there stages of grief? What strategies can you suggest to assist with grief? Whoa. That is a
big topic there, Sibo.
Big topic, a major topic, especially right now. I feel like grief is a major part of what everyone's going through right now, but I'll save that. Okay, first thing. Does everyone experience grief after a loss? Is the first question. What are your thoughts?
I've never really thought about it. It's my initial thought. I've never questioned it. So now I'm I feel like for it to be a loss, there would be a reaction after.
I'm thinking, there's some losses where if it's a loss that you were kind of hoping for, like it might be a relief, right? Like I lost my cancer went into remission. I lost the fear of that. So now it's no longer there. Or I lost, someone in my life who was annoying moved away. I lost them. So that feels good. Is that sort of the thing we might be talking about, Chris?
Yeah, I guess so. I threw that question out there because I definitely have met people before who have experienced maybe a loss of a loved one or the loss of abilities, and I feel that there's a subjectivity there in terms of how people respond to it, right? So maybe how I feel they might react isn't always the case, right? And also some people are shocked. Some people are absolutely devastated by a loss. Well, whereas other people are not, and they feel kind of worried about that. Sometimes they feel that there's something wrong with them because they're not grieving, So I just wanted to maybe capture, again, how subjective this process is, right? And see if we can try to make some sense of it for people out there.
Great.
I feel that there is like grief that goes with a loss, but then we would have to, come up with defining or describing what grief is in the process, which is one of your questions, because somebody might go through grief like I think that you could grieve different ways depending on what the loss is. So you don't have to necessarily grieve the same way if you're going to grieve the loss of a close loved one versus grieving the loss of a job that you didn't like. You might go through a different process, or the intensity of that would be different. But I think there would still be a feeling associated with it.
Yeah, I agree, Brooke. I think grief is generally, well, in my opinion, I think if you experience some kind of loss, whether a death of a loved one, or we can go into other forms of loss, of course, but I think the reaction that you might have, whether mental, emotional, or distress of some kind, is considered grief, or that's what I would consider grief. So
Joanna, Joanna and I's dad, he's a psychologist, and he specializes a lot in grief. And he once said that when grief is too neat and tidy, he's kind of concerned about that. Because he said when there's a lot of emotions and a lot of variability, often that's kind of part of the process, right? So it kind of brings up an interesting point. If someone is not really showing outward signs of grief, is that concerning? Because sometimes down the road, we have, these unresolved grief situations, and then behaviors and thoughts and intensive feelings start to show up, right?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because there can be delayed grief, right? That's a possibility. But I wonder too, because this would also spin into cultural component. Different cultures are going to experience grief in different ways and express grief in different ways. So being sensitive to that, and as therapists, how our clients behave in the therapy room isn't necessarily how they're going to be behaving at home in private or whatnot, or even, we have our truth bias, so we're going to believe what they're saying, but they may not be completely forthcoming or vulnerable, especially around grief, which is extremely vulnerable to share with someone. So we might not even be getting an accurate depiction.
Sure. I guess, if you don't mind me chiming in, one thing that I confront with my clients a lot of times is an idea, and maybe this is something that's in the States more than in Canada, but this idea that grief is a problem. Grief in itself is pathological. Like, we need to, you're grieving, you need to medicate that, you need to hurry up and get through that. And so down here, it's not uncommon for me to hear of someone, they lose a loved one, they lose a spouse, they lose a kid, or something like that. And immediately they go to their doctor for medication to try to not feel that. And then, whether through anxiety meds or depression meds, they just want to kind of medicate out of that, or stay so busy with either the funeral preparations or whatever else they're doing so that they just don't have to feel it. And then inevitably what I see from that is a few months later, maybe they get off the meds, and then their body still has to go through the grieving process. I mean, grief is a natural process that everyone has to go through at one time or another. And I feel like we don't really need to teach someone how to grieve as much as we need to teach them how to stop avoiding grief. Like, it's something we need to all go through when we've experienced a loss, and really stop pathologizing it, because it's actually the way that we get over something or we get through something is through the grief process.
It's almost like the grief is inevitable, Ryan. Like we whether or not you're going to admit it, you're experiencing grief. There's going to be some distress, some feeling of suffering from that loss in some way, whether you're not able to think properly, whether you're fatigued, whether you're emotionally distraught. And so whether you're going to admit it or not, it's happening to you. So I think the act of actually finding outlets for it, or kind of facing it a little bit, or helping yourself through it, is what I think a lot of people sometimes struggle with. And it totally depends on so many different factors, right? But
yeah. So I guess what you're trying to say, Joe, is there is going to be some level of grief there, even if you perceive the loss in a pretty healthy way. Maybe have a strong faith. Maybe there's a way for you to interpret it, so it's not devastating to you. You feel that there's still some level of grief that's happening there.
I think so. I think it doesn't need to be a negative thing. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I think it's just the acknowledgement that there's some form of loss, and for people, if it's a positive thing, or they can depend on, like you said, faith or something to help them move through it, great. But I think, in my thoughts, there's grief experienced for loss.
Just to throw something else out there, I think all loss requires some bit of grieving. But I will distinguish that I believe that there is a difference between a loss that's inanimate versus a loss that's personal. Like, it's they call that an attachment loss, right? When someone has a strong attachment with somebody, some person, and that person either rejects them or goes away or dies or something like that. I think there is something that reaches us on a deeper sort of interpersonal level. I think that all of us in the world experienced some degree of grief and loss with the coronavirus. I think that's, with the change in our routines and our schedules, I think we all had to grieve kind of the loss of a routine. But I do think there's something a little bit deeper when it comes to strong attachments that we have with other people.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes people are unaware of the process, or maybe there's social norms, right? Like for guys that, oh, you got to be tough, you got to suck it up, you got to move on. And yeah, it's already been mentioned, there's a bit of a stigma there, when you're grieving, which is, of course, it's a bad situation. We want people to embrace it and to feel the feelings, right?
Absolutely. So you mentioned here, so we kind of talked through a bit of does every loss include grief, but are there really stages of grief? We talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her work with the stages of dying. What do you guys know about
through
that
those
work?
quickly? What can we identify those just for? I know there's denial.
Sure. DABDA is what people often refer to. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So denial being like, oh no, and so here's one of the big problems with the whole idea of the stages of grief is it was initially Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was studying people who were terminally ill, and she was talking to them about their experience of getting the diagnosis and then how they coped with that up through their death. And so it was about how did they cope with it? So the first being denial. Oh no, that can't be true. The test must be wrong. I'm fine. That sort of thing. Anger, like, damn it, why did this happen? And who screwed this up for me, or whatever that might be, the anger that comes out. A bargaining, which is, well, maybe if I just did this, or maybe if we did that, or maybe I make a pact with God, or maybe I try this experimental treatment or something like that to try to get out of it somehow, right? Then there's the depression, which is really feeling the sadness of, okay, this is really happening and I'm losing a lot right now. And then getting to the acceptance of saying, okay, I'm at peace with this. I guess I'm good to go. So that's the shorthand of the stages of dying from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Right. So there is a book that suggests 3 other stages, or a different stage model. And so the stages proposed are, the first is shock. The second is disorganization. And I have low battery. And the third is reorganization.
Okay.
So what the book proposes is that each of the stages, I'm going to move now and plug my phone in and lose the video, that each of the stages there isn't a timeline to it. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. So it's a very acceptance-based model of you go through those. So somebody might go through shock in 24 hours, or somebody might take months to go through shock because maybe they have to triage organizing the person's affairs or whatnot, assuming that the grief is the loss of a person, right? And then we go into this state of disorganization, which everything is chaotic. Emotions are up and down. You might not have a structure or routine, all these different things. And then we go into reorganization of life, where there is that acceptance of the loss, and then we revamp and reset. And how am I going to move forward without the presence of what I have lost? And I like that model because it really is going to take however long it's going to take, and it's going to respect your cultural beliefs or values around grieving. And if you need to cry, go for it. If you're stoic, okay, whatever that might be. And I've had a lot of clients resonate with it for other losses as well, whether it's like attachment trauma, an attachment loss of rejection or an end of a relationship, or other losses, right? Like moving or whatnot. So yeah, I like that one. I like those stages.
Do me a favor, Brooke, send me that and we'll send me the reference to that, and I'll include it in the notes for the podcast. All right. And people can look for it and read about it themselves. Cool.
That's great.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I definitely like those steps more. Kubler-Ross, it's interesting 'cause as Brian mentioned, it was developed for those who are dying,
Sure.
and ultimately was adopted by lots of people who are actually going through the grief process, right? And then I think she developed those stages in the late 60s, and for the longest time, it was extremely influential, those steps, right? Until maybe more recently, they realized that there's actually not a ton of empirical research to back those steps. That being said, a lot of people find them meaningful, and I've met a ton of people who have, it's actually helped them navigate through the grief process, right?
Yeah.
So I think in a way, instead of there just being 5 stages or whatever it might be, I think there's actually hundreds of stages of grief depending on that individual. And I think trying to normalize that for people, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I agree, Chris. I think people do find some comfort in it, right? They're like, other people are feeling this. This is normal. I'm not kind of all these really strong emotions. They fit in somewhere. When I talk to clients, though, and I think I get this ripples away from or learn from a dad, because our dad, for those listening, has been a psychologist for over 40 years, and he does a lot of grief work. And so, he acknowledges that there are the people, the Kubler-Ross stages, but he also talks about how he actually kind of goes away from those and talks more that grief is just so subjective, and really normalizes that it could be different for everyone. And that sometimes the stages can, if people tie themselves to those, they might feel like they're doing something wrong, or they're not grieving the way they need to, or if they skip. And really the stages actually aren't, you need to go through them sequentially, I believe. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's true. That's true.
But you can go back and forth, or, and I don't think a lot of people know that. So I think it's pretty mainstream, but the way I talk to clients is that it's just super subjective, and there's no timeline, and there's just so many different things to kind of teach them about that.
Well, let me push you guys a little bit here personally. Like, if you think about things you've had to grieve in your own life, does it seem to follow stages? Does it seem to follow waves, or just is there anything there that seems like a common process for you to work through grief?
For me, I guess I would say, I like to think of it, do I experience? Yeah, I definitely don't conceptualize it in the stage way. I think of whatever feelings or emotions come up, because depending on the type of loss of experience, I'll go with a friend. There's not necessarily each of those different stages of experience. So for me, it's the waves. I feel like really strong at first, a lot of emotions. The earlier days are a lot heavier. You're more impacted by it. You think about that loss a lot more. And then you might kind of find some normalcy and kind of get back into the routine of life, or whatever that looks like. And then you might be hit by another wave one day, and then the next day you're fine. So the waves can kind of hit you whenever. They might come more frequently, and then kind of lessen as time goes on. So that's kind of how I would think about it personally.
Yeah.
And then it's up to me if I kind of ride that wave, if I avoid the wave altogether. If I avoid all those feelings completely, then they don't go anywhere, and that could not necessarily help me move through it, right? So
true.
Yeah, I think what you said, Joe, really resonated with me too, in terms of just kind of when experiencing some grief, kind of going to flow, and yeah, the feelings that, like how you described it, the waves of the feelings, right? And helps to express them and to connect, but also there's the self-care stuff, which we kind of touched on last week in regard to the stress in the body. So a bit of overlap there. But yeah, I don't think I've followed the steps per se in regard to my personal grieving.
I would agree with you, Chris. I do think that each of those have their place, though. Every time I've lost something, whether it's losing, I've lost jobs, I've lost relationships, and I've lost loved ones. And I will certainly say that, kind of the unfortunate news for people who have lost a loved one, but particularly someone who's close to them, is it's not like you get over it and like forget about it and it's gone forever. No, a lot of people lose someone and they're still feeling some bit of grief years or decades later because something reminds them of that, or they're not in it all the time, but they can certainly be kind of teleported back to that moment and feel it again. And I guess if you can make peace with that and kind of come to an acceptance of that and say, you know what, this is the way that I remember this person, and there's a bittersweetness to this memory. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe that's actually some way to keep a hold of the person that you've lost.
It's almost like there's not this pressure to get over it, right? I think there's a loss. There might be that little hole there, and you're going to learn to kind of live your life around that, and things might bring you back to that, and you kind of, like you said, make peace or have your reminders. But I think some people are like, they might even put time constraints, or it's been months, or it's been a year, I'm still not over it. And it's like, that's okay. Let's find out how to make this easier for you. Or how are you grieving? How are you expressing that grief? What supports are you finding for yourself? A lot of people expect time to heal. But if people actually don't take the time and effort to do the healing, you can go years and be stuck in your grief or not fully resolve grief.
Absolutely. I think in Western culture, and I'm not sure exactly what it's like in Canada, but I know down here, people, someone loses a loved one and the boss will say, hey, take the weekend off and we'll see you on Monday. It's like, you kind of expect like, you'll just get right back in the game. And if you look globally, there are many cultures out there where, okay, you've lost someone in your family. You've got a year to grieve. Like, that's it. You wear black every day, you cry, and you feel all your feelings a lot for an extended period of time, because that's what grief requires for some folks, and it's like socially acceptable in other places, and it's not so socially acceptable in the West. And that's unfortunate. People feel like if I'm not, over this in a couple of weeks, then there must be something wrong with me. And I just don't see that.
Yeah. It's so true. It's supposed to be so neat and tidy, right? As you mentioned there. But I actually met someone a few years ago, and she has done remarkable work in terms of recreating her life after her husband passed away. But she mentioned that sometimes she needs a Steve day. So where she just, needs to stay in her pajamas and look at albums and just those feelings, embrace those feelings, right? The next day she feels lighter and she gets back to her life. So, and this is a good decade after her husband passed away.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. Yeah, just take some time. I'll make a plug for someone I interviewed a few years ago. David Kessler is his name, and he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. He was kind of a protege of hers, and he's around. And he wrote a book called Finding Meaning: The Sixth Stage of Grief, where he talks about the importance of not just going through all the emotional processes, but also trying to find meaning in the grief and figuring out like, what am I learning about myself through this? What am I learning about the value of life, or about, how to live my life, kind of how to kind of integrate the pain into something that's more constructive and positive for you. So I really like that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps, and I think it just shows too, right? Grief, it can definitely be subjective, and I like how you brought something else forward there, because I think that'll help a lot of people.
Yes, David Kessler, Finding
Who is
Meaning.
a hockey player? Did you already say that?
No, he's a hockey player.
They're Ryan Kessler.
Oh no! Damn. Never mind. Disregard. I thought you were talking about. I was like, oh man, he wrote a book? I thought you were talking about a Vancouver Canuck.
Joanna, the avid Canuck fan.
Yeah, clearly it shows.
He's not a Canuck anymore, and that's probably a good thing.
Oh man.
No, this is David
Never mind.
The Elizabeth Kubler-Ross protege, who's a psychotherapist somewhere in the United States. So yes,
okay.
I don't think he's a hockey player. He may be.
He's definitely not.
Maybe that's his brother.
He was at the symposium there. Yeah, he was at the psychotherapy symposium. Yeah, very knowledgeable.
He certainly was.
Right. Okay.
So, so to get practical here with our final part of this ambush question, what strategies can you suggest to assist with grief? What can we do to actually help people? Maybe there's someone listening to us right now who's dealing with grief. What can we share with them to help them through that process?
I think that's a tough question. I'm supposed to lean in here. So I think that's a tough question because I feel like COVID grief, while it is grief, might be different than a grief of like a close loved one.
Sure.
So if somebody loses a loved one or goes through something more interpersonal, then I'm a big fan of like writing the letter that you never sent, or talking to the person, whether it be out loud or just in your imagination, or having a visit with them, kind of like a wiser self activity. Imagine yourself going and meeting them somewhere that you feel is safe and comfortable, and having a conversation with them. And
what's a wiser self activity? Back up there. What's that?
Oh, good call, Ryan. So the wiser self activity, it's a meditation or a mindfulness exercise that you can do where you visualize walking into an area. You get to visualize what that is, if it's a garden or a path or a building or whatever it might be. And you come across an area, a dwelling of some sort, and you imagine your wiser self coming out to greet you, and you take note of your wiser self. So what they look like, how old they are, how they greet you, how they stand, what they're wearing, and you imagine having a conversation with them, and you can ask them about a hard time that you're having, and listen to the advice that your wiser self gives you as you move forward, and then you can walk away. So sometimes you can have a little visit like that, right? If it's an interpersonal loss. But a COVID loss, I feel, might be a little bit different than that, right? So whether that's, I think there's a lot of feeling the feels that need to happen with it, and management of those emotions, and trying to live for the moment and the day, and what's in my control right now. What can I do? What do I need to do that I might not want to do, but I know is good for me? Those things, which I know we've talked about a few times already, sort of. Yeah.
I like this.
Yeah,
The wiser self. Yeah.
I think I would just, I think there's a few different things. I would just make note that just be kind to yourself. I think whatever you're going to be experiencing, just allow yourself some time to kind of suss that out a little bit. I would encourage yourself to talk. If you don't feel like talking, like Brooke said, some kind of writing would be good. Having a journal or whatever you want to call it, could be helpful. When it comes to people around you, I encourage you to teach people how to support you. I think some people get pretty weird around grief. They don't know what to say to the person who has had a significant loss in their life. So I might be like, you know what, I need you to check in with me, or I'd like you to check in with me maybe every week, or see how I'm doing. I might not want to talk, but maybe just reach out to me, or ask me to go for a walk. Or just listen. I just need you to hear me out. You don't need to say something to make it better. So I think people welcome that, to just, so if you know someone who's experienced a loss, ask them just, how can I help you? Just call attention to it. They will probably receive it generally well. And if you're the one experiencing a loss, just don't be afraid to ask, or kind of teach people how to support you. That's all I'll call it right now.
No, Joanna, may I add something?
Yeah.
So for the support people, not just the person going through grief, but the people supporting the person through grief, I learned this lesson actually from your mom, Chris and Joanna. So our practice used to have another clinician named Tina, and she was going through some struggles, and she's passed away now. But she shared with us that some of the things that were most helpful to her were things that your mom was doing, which was, instead of Tina having to say what she needed, your mom would just do stuff. And respectfully so. So it wouldn't be in a pushy way, but if she knew she had an appointment coming, she would say, do you have a ride? I'd love to drive you. Or, oh, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. I'd love to drop by and drop this off for you. So it was opposed to Tina coming up with something to say, or something that she needed help with. Your mom was able to come up with things that seemed reasonable in that moment and offer it directly, which made it easier for Tina to say, yes, I would like that assistance. And that always stuck with me. So any friends that have gone through things, I'm like, I'm going to come over and I'm going to help you with your laundry. And if you don't want me there, tell me and I'll leave. And I'm going to bring some food for your freezer.
Yeah. I'm going to drop off that coffee or
Yeah.
let's go for a walk. I'll be by this afternoon or.
Yeah. And if you really don't want to, please say no, but I'm going to come over.
Yeah.
Yeah. For myself, my condo burnt down years ago, and didn't have content insurance either. I was playing the odds. I don't recommend that for anyone who's listening to this. But lost everything but a Geordie LaForge decorative plate and my picture of my friend Kyle. So what else do you need to restart your life? But so kind of more of a, it's not an attachment loss, but I guess obviously items of mine. And I felt a couple of things helped me out. One is focusing on the essentials. So the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise, connecting with positive people. So I found that helped me out in that circumstance. When it comes to losing people I care about, more of an attachment loss, a couple of things have helped me out too is telling stories, right? So speak their name and I just feel when you laugh together and connect together, you feel a lot lighter after, which is nice. And also I try to think of the values and traits that that person had and try to change the way I'm living my life because of that. So if I embody some of those values and try to live differently because of the influence of that person, then they kind of live on through my actions, right? So just a couple of thoughts.
And I'll quickly make note, I think as good as it is to kind of feel the feels and do all these different things we're talking about, sometimes after a bit of time, it's good to kind of find some routine and go back to some kind of way of life for yourself, even though, because that could help bring distraction, because as good as it is to feel your feelings, you don't want to just be sitting in them all day for days and weeks at a time. Like, not days, maybe weeks, months at a time. So I think there's some, whenever it fits in there for you individually, to start getting some routine back. And
routine is key.
Well, this my comment's a little bit kind of backwards from Joe's, but I'm speaking to the people who are saying, like, after a day of being tearful, they're saying, this is enough, I should be done with this by now. And I just know a lot of folks like that, and particularly it's guys. Like, it's okay to cry. It's all right to cry. It's okay to cry, and to cry a lot. And if you think you're crying too much, well, then cry twice that much, and then ask that same question. Like,
crying is good.
Crying is so good. It's so cleansing. It's so healing. It's so good for you. It doesn't matter if you're an ugly crier or if you're a attractive.
I know. I was like,
I'm pointing to myself. I'm definitely. Is she laughing? Is she crying? Who knows? I don't know. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. But there's so much to be said for the expression of that emotion. And if you've ever been able to experience the relief of a very good cry, I got it off my chest. That is possible through grief. And you may have to cry a lot of tears to get there, but it's okay. But then, after a while, yes, Joe, I agree that you have to get back to a routine and keep moving on, because you can't stay there forever, right?
Oh yeah. And that's definitely, there's no time limit or expectation on that. It's very much, I encourage the crying and the acknowledging. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Ryan.
Well, this was a very helpful podcast here, Chris. Thank you for the ambush. This is very nice.
Way to go, Chris.
Very timely.
Doing a happy dance.
Really did it. No, good discussion. Some great ideas.
Yes, I thought it was very, very nice. Nice to hear different perspectives and kind of revisit the stages of grief. And I want to hear about those three from you there, Brooke.
It's a big topic.
It is a big topic.
And not an easy one for a lot of people. So
no. So I guess maybe we could say, if you are listening to this and if you've experienced some grief, maybe you don't even know if you've experienced grief. Maybe it's kind of passed you by that there's been some grief in this whole isolation time. But maybe take a look at yourself and see if you're grieving. Give yourself some space for that. Let yourself process that. Give yourself time to move through that in a healthy way. So, with that, we will say goodbye for now. Visit us at mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Send us an email at info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Check us out on Instagram or on Facebook. And
Send us any questions.
And send us any questions you have, and we will say good night for now. Bye, everybody.
Good night. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Toodles.
Bye.